So a little while ago, I made a video on the PlayStation Vita and how a few months ago, it got a pretty big upgrade in the sense that it's now become extremely easy to completely open up the system to homebrew, install apps, plugins, different original games that have been ported to the system, and yes, backing up your own Vita games, right? But there was a device in the Vita family of systems that I mentioned I wanted to go over in a separate video, and that's what we're going to do today as we take a look at the PlayStation Vita TV and how unlocking it through homebrew completely opens up the potential for this system. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe if you're new. First things first, let's take a look at the Vita model that I'll be using here today. That is the white TV that I imported from Japan. I did an entire unboxing and checked it out in a video previously. Doesn't really matter which region you use for your Vita, as Sony just made it region free. And in fact, a lot of times I recommend checking out the Japanese market, since just the Vita in general had some really cool color schemes there, like that light blue or orange. And at times they tend to be a little bit cheaper. So again, definitely worth checking out other regions if you're in the market for a Vita. Now, what I wanted to do with this TV was a couple of things. One, I did want to modify it because I found a lot of convenience in the regular Vita that I had when I did open that up to be able to store games directly on that SD card. And two, the Vita TV has several games that are just barred off from playing, so they've essentially have a list that tells the Vita TV what it can and cannot play, and if you put a game like Uncharted in, for example, it's on that list, so the TV will just decide not to play it, even though, after what we've seen, it's well-equipped to do so. Well, okay, maybe well-equipped is a bit of a stretch there, which we'll touch on a bit later on. But first thing I needed to do, obviously, was unlock the system, and it's just as easy as we talked about in that previous Vita video. You go to a website, and it simply unlocks the Vita, and then will allow you to install applications that will then lead you to custom firmware. From that point, I installed an SD to Vita with a 256 micro SD card, which these cards have gotten so cheap now, where you can get a 256 gigabyte card from a reputable dealer on Amazon for like $26. So it makes it very easy to store all of your applications and games on the Vita, much different than when the system came out back in 2011. And from there, I just needed to start loading up applications that I could use to set up the TV as I needed. The first thing clearly was I needed to open up and get rid of that list that blocks several games from running on the TV. That application I found, which you can just search in the Vita database application, was Whitelister. I ran it from the home screen. It took a couple of seconds, and that was it. We were good to go. So I started installing several different games that were on that list originally, and they ran fine. The biggest one I think most people are checking out would be Uncharted, and it makes sense considering Golden Abyss is still just a PlayStation Vita title, so you need the system to play it, but that also means you would be stuck playing it as a handheld game, and I'm sure there are many people who would probably like to just play it on their TV, hanging out, sitting on the couch. The only issue with Golden Abyss, as I've seen and kind of displaying here, one, the frame rate isn't great, and two, it was running below 540p because the Vita screen clearly would have been set up a bit better for that and would hide a lot of the visual faults and artifacting that are much more apparent when it's stretched out. In order to try to circumvent this somewhat, I did download an application that would allow me to upclock or overclock the Vita itself, and I pushed it as far as I could, and then I also downloaded a graphics application that would let me kind of play around with the resolution that it would target and display, and it still wasn't great in terms of visuals. You could still tell what's happening on the screen and all of that, but if I pushed it up as far as possible, which was like 960 by 544, it would start to tank the frame rate pretty significantly. I mean, this was the age, or at least the generation back with the 360 and the PS3, where frame rate was definitely not a focus, or they just weren't able to, and many games just kind of hung out in the 20 FPS range, and well, you're seeing a very similar result here with Uncharted. However, I did lower the resolution a touch and push the clocks as much as possible, and I was getting right around that 25 to 30 FPS mark, which, if anything, hey, it's nostalgic, but I was able to go through many parts of Uncharted that I was kind of concerned for, because The Vita had a very specific setup that games would take advantage of, and Bend Studio did try to show off what the Vita could do with Golden Abyss, and it makes sense considering this game came out in 2011, which, you look at it now, kind of impressive when you consider that fact that it was a handheld game from back then with visuals that people are kind of looking at like, wow, this is almost like a portable PlayStation 3. Well, blown up, not necessarily, but yeah, maybe on that smaller Vita screen, I can see the comparison. Nonetheless, all the different aspects to it, like motion or touch controls or anything there, has been sorted out. There are plugins you can use to make this work. And in fact, I was using gyro aiming with the DualShock 4. And there is one aspect that would use a camera on the Vita, for example. That's also been solved. What they did was basically just replace it with a blank square, and it seems to get you past any parts that require that. Also, check it out. I picked up a brand new DualShock 4 to go along with this Vita TV project, and you could still walk into a Walmart or a Best Buy, and they're just up there on store shelves. Even though we're almost 10 years out, still pretty cool to be able to go in and get one brand new rather than have to rely on the used secondhand market. But I was pretty satisfied with Uncharted, how it ran within reason, of course, for being a Vita title from 2011. But I also started to jump around to other games that were like blocked off from the Vita TV. Think of things like Call of Duty, which it's definitely a game that was, once again, set up for that handheld aspect with the Vita, and I'm sure there are many other Call of Duty games you'd rather play on the TV, but this in particular was specific to the Vita, so yeah, it was kind of fun to be able to just play it on the TV and see what they came up with here. And I don't know, maybe a bit of a preview for what they could do with the Switch, where that's going to get Call of Duty. Time will tell on that one. I also checked out Wipeout, which, again, it's a fun game to be able to play on the Vita. And then moving up to TV, this one in particular translated over pretty well. Unfortunately, all of the menus you have to use a touch screen with. So in this instance, for the DualShock 4, they went ahead and remapped it to that touchpad, which makes sense. And it works well enough for navigating in menus, but if you get into a game where it wants you to do different motions, it's kind of annoying, and that's one of the reasons a plugin exists that makes it so you don't have to press down on that touchpad and move. You can just kind of glide your finger across, and it'll count the input. But overall, as I went through and played game after game after game, they all seem to work well enough. I know Sony was hesitant, I'm sure, to unlock some of these games when they were so reliant on some of the Vita's more unique features and quirks, but for the most part, they seem to get around a lot of this, the homebrew community, with these different plugins, and I feel like Sony probably could have figured it out, and if the Vita didn't struggle as much as it did, they probably would have gotten there at some point and sort of picked and chosen and unlocked certain titles here and there, which we did see at one point where Killzone came off of that list through a patch. Oh, and you can sync up multiple controllers to the Vita TV. Just get a bunch of DualShock 4s together, or I guess DualShock 3s, and you can play some of the different multiplayer games that way, and obviously you can load up all kinds of different homebrew projects that would support that. And I guess the other big aspect is you can capture footage from the PlayStation Vita TV through HDMI and that direct source, which compared to the regular handheld Vita, you're probably just pointing a camera at it or using some sort of software to get a kind of a sketchy connection, I assume. In this instance, though, you will need some way to strip out HDCP support, which is basically a way to circumvent people just recording streams or other forms of media, and it's something that Sony put into their systems during this generation with the PlayStation 3, but using like a splitter that you find on Amazon that everyone pretty much picks up for their PlayStation 3 will work fine with this Vita TV, and it allowed me to record this footage now. But overall, I do like what I saw here with the Vita TV. I think it's really, really cool what we have now with the Vita family of systems, where you can unlock them incredibly easily. Like, it's not a long set of steps anymore where you got to plug the device into your PC or have this formatted just right to do this. You go to a website, you hit a button, it unlocks it, and then you just hit a few other buttons and prompts, and that's it. The thing pretty much does it automatically just about, and it's just made this world a lot easier to get into, whether it's with your Vita TV or with just your regular handheld Vita. And I know I'm not necessarily breaking new ground here or anything with this video talking about the ability to play some of these games or homebrew on the TV, but I just think now where we are even from a year ago when it comes to ease of access and entry into the homebrew scene for the Vita, it's pretty impressive and worth talking about. Now, with all of this said, there is still a pretty big roadblock that we have to discuss, which comes down to acquiring a PlayStation Vita TV at, I'll say, an acceptable price, because pricing around the Vita in general has gone up to ridiculous amounts. You look at the games, and the average price is well over what the original retail price was for most Vita titles when they came out. The Vita handheld has gone up in price, and the Vita TV even more so. It comes down to really just availability, as there weren't many Vitas, and there certainly weren't many Vita TV systems. So I think right now, if you just have one in storage, maybe in the attic or something, and you go, oh wow, that'd be pretty cool to try out, yeah, I think it's definitely worth hooking up. If you're trying to track one down, I still think it's pretty cool to have Vita games just playable on your TV, and the ability to just kind of use that DualShock 4 right alongside of it. I mean, it's pretty fun. It's a really fun way to experience these Vita games, even though their native resolution doesn't exactly lend itself well to large displays. But seeing the homebrew scene continue to support the Vita lineup and really build on it as we've gone along, these plugins, applications, fixes, even updates for current games through patches that enable higher resolution displays, all these things, is continuing. So it's something that is still current and will continue to build. And with what I've seen from the Vita TVs and the Vita line, I don't exactly think they're going to be getting any cheaper, especially anytime soon. So let me know what you guys think about all this down below. If you have a Vita TV, maybe you picked it up when it was fire sale for 50 or 60 bucks back in the day, or maybe you got one recently and had a chance to check it out. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.